Inspector, we are live.
Thank you very much. Okay, it is now 2 o'clock, and so I resume the hearing. I will turn directly to criterion 8. And that is that master plans should ensure the effective use of sustainable urban drainage and sustainable water management. Is anyone here to tell me that they shouldn't, or that that proposed criteria should be altered in any way? Okay, thank you. In which case then I will go to criterion 9. That master plans should ensure a hierarchy of linked, high quality and attractive public spaces and public realm that is safe, attractive and supports social interaction for all age groups. And the same question. Then I shall go to criterion 10. That strategic master plans should ensure that developments are designed to last with clear stewardship, management and maintenance plans. Is that right, or should that be altered in some way? Mr. White.
Can you hear me, sir?
I can.
Thank you. It was really an observation on this that with experience at the master planning stage, management and maintenance is often very difficult to confirm, and it's not really until you get into 106 negotiations, often with triggers themselves, before you can actually define whether the management and maintenance may be through the local authority, local parish council, management company or other body, and particularly where there's lots of SUDs and things involved. So it's an observation that I don't think in reality you'll be able to set out the stewardship, management and maintenance at the master planning stage. Therefore, this should be deleted.
Is your concern there, Mr. White, about the timing rather than the principle?
Yes, there always ends up being put in place management and maintenance, but frankly, I've never found that to actually be crystallized until, in fact, the 106 is triggered and decisions actually have to be made. And, for example, parish councils are then offered the opportunity to take it on, and they actually have to decide whether they do it or not. And normally you take these things forward to keep all options open. The local authorities will normally insist on a hierarchy or cascade. So it's offered to them first, and they may nominate the parish councils, etc. But until someone actually is presented with final detailed proposals that they can cost and then accept to take on, it's very difficult in advance to say this will definitely be managed and maintained by such and such a body.
Yeah, I understand the point. Ms. Cottier.
Thanks. The SUDS issue and its maintenance is really important because in the East of Luton plan, but also some others, it's important that they would be not only effectively used, but they would have to be maintained because there's so many of them. And also they tend to be magnets for mosquitoes, and that's going to become a future more of a recurring problem. as the climate changes has become warmer, the larva of mosquitoes is likely to breed more effectively in stagnant pools of water. So to run the risk of large pools of water just being left and then really nobody's really maintaining them. And we have suds at the bottom of Wigmore Lane, and also there's another one behind just as you go up towards Darley Hall. There's another one on the edge of just by the airport, and they're fenced off with high metal railings so that obviously kids can't get in and drown, but they're basically left and nobody maintains them. But because they're so large and they're surrounded by metal railings and they're on the edge of a busy road, it's it's not too much of a problem. But if they were in the middle of a housing estate and they were left to kind of breed, and there'd be midges and mosquitoes and people getting bitten, it's a really bad strategy to leave that open as or to delete it. We definitely need maintaining. And I have a video of flooded land that I took 2 weeks ago up on the east of EL3 site. There was a massive lake formed in the corner of the field. So I took a video of it, and I'm going to include that in the final mop-up consultation. So you can visually see how flooded that land gets. It's very heavy clay, and it holds the water, and the flood also goes off into the road as well. So the climate's changing, and there's when it rains, it really rains, and then this all gets flooded. So suds in any regardless of the site, they're going to have to feature more prominently perhaps than they did before.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, what I think I'm going to do, if this works for the council, is to continue to go through FM 001 and then ask the council to respond to the points, but particularly to the suggestions that we have heard for tweaks, changes, modifications to these proposed modifications. So does that work for you, Ms. Flage?
Well, yes, it does. Yeah.
That's good. Ms. Solander?
Yeah, just a couple of points as we sort of end this list of 10. Just a couple of thoughts. One is about, should parking appear on this list? Because there's sort of some standards around parking, but once you get into town centre and sustainable locations, and if you get onto the sort of the more retail areas, parking's quite loose. It sort of says it can be adapted and changed, depending on how sustainable the site is. So I'm wondering if this is something that ought to be in the master plan, an agreement that actually either the site, is in a very sustainable location and therefore it doesn't need one car parking per, so many bedrooms. Getting that sorted out early on will be good. So I want to throw that in as should that be item 11. And the other thing I wanted to throw in, as I'm a transition town, is we see councils like York and Norwich actually building zero carbon homes on their houses, so ahead of sort of national standards. Is this a place where North Herts District Council might want to put some ideas of what they want done on council land in for master planning for their own sites? I don't know if it's here or in an SPD, but I just wanted to throw that idea forward as something that could be considered. Thank you.
Ms. Hamilton.
Yeah, just a last couple of points as we're finishing this section. So I'm taking it that I'm taking it that I can't get the word out. Strategic objectives that are in the local plan will be incorporated into these strategic master planning things, such as like the EMV4, EMV5. I'm taking that will be incorporated into those. Am I right in thinking that?
I don't quite follow. Okay,
so like the strategic objectives that were put in the initial local plan under EVM4, EVM5, those sort of things, I take it they're being incorporated in, because they're part of the local plan, but are they being incorporated into the strategic master planning? Because that's where it mentions things like climate change. The reason I'm asking that, and it's taken me actually days to sit and read through the local plan again regarding the climate change that's been brought up with the strategic master plans, the master plan and everything. And the fact that we said it seemed to have been just poked in one paragraph when it's such a big thing is because it is quite a big thing, because the government sort of said, in addition to the statutory requirements, blah, 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 there's a statutory duty on local planning authorities to include the policies in their local plan designed to tackle climate change and its impacts. And I know North Herts District Council have done that because in some of their policies, they have put sort of things like, using renewable energies when constructing sites and everything else. And I'm guessing that's going to be incorporated into the strategic master planning. But nowhere did I find in here, as it's been mentioned today, nowhere did I find all local plans should have set a carbon dioxide emissions reduction target and lay out the ways of them measuring progress on this for the plan to be sound.
Where are you reading from there, Ms Hamilton?
I'm reading this from the government website, which states
Which part of the government website?
Guidance on climate change, sir.
Pardon?
Guidance on climate change. Oh, I've lost it again. Oh God. Yes, I can send it to you, so I can send you that exact bit. But they say on it, in response to Climate Change Act 2008, all local plans must set a carbon dioxide emissions reduction target and lay out clear ways of measuring progress on this. I can send that to you, so I can pull it out with the link and send it on to Louise St John Howe. And I have gone through the local plan, and I did note that there are policies such as EMV4 which sort of state, oh yes, we'll use renewable energy and this for construction and blah blah blah. But there seem to be some missing, and the fact that we're now looking at these strategic master plans and these points to make the plan sound, I was just wondering why. Yeah.
Okay, I think I don't know what the council will say about this point, and we'll, as I said a moment ago, I'll come back to the council once we get to the end of this particular section. But yeah, I mean, the local plan itself has lots of policies that developments will be assessed against. They don't necessarily need to be within the master plan policy, if you see what I mean. They don't. Okay. They don't get forgotten.
No, it was just something that raised it with me, and I did check that the policies were in there regarding certain things in line with the 2008 Climate Change Act. But that thing came up, and I was going to mention it before now, and then I didn't because I've got so many pages of stuff I'm trying to remember. And I just thought, oh yes, I was wondering, and I did look through the local plan. And I thought I still can't see that emissions target. So I will definitely read through the government bit again and make sure that I've dreamt it. But yeah, I mean, if that needs to be given to make the plan sound, then that should really be incorporated in, shouldn't it, sir?
Possibly. I don't know if Mr. Smith or Ms. Ormsby would know where Miss Hamilton's reading from.
Not off the top of my head. I'm just having a quick look on the MPP in the MPPG on climate change, but I haven't found that particular quote just yet. So we'll keep looking.
Sorry, I'll have a look as well. Sorry.
It's fine. I am somewhere. Miss Hamilton. Yeah, if you would just send I don't know what the best way to do this is, probably via a link or a printout of the pages that you are reading from to Mrs. St John Howe, and those can be added to the examination library, because I am interested to see.
If I find it, then I'll obviously send a copy to Mr. Smith as well. I don't
Yeah.
think I'll have dreamt it.
No.
I'll have a look, I'll find it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else before I move off of criterion 10? Okay, as I mentioned, then what I'm going to do is go through the remainder of FM 001 before coming to the council for its final comments on everything that we've heard. And as I say, particularly, I don't know if this is going to fall to you, Ms. Flage, it seems likely, but particularly the suggestions that we've had for modifying the text. So the next part then, strategic master plans will be produced for sites SP 14 to 19 by the landowner / developer in collaboration with the council and key stakeholders. To ensure sites are comprehensively planned and delivered, planning applications should be preceded by and consistent with an agreed master plan. Should that say strategic master plan? Yes, I think, okay. And presumably so should the next sentence.
Yes, yes. In fact, for clarity, I think all references to master plan need to be prefaced by strategic. So it's clear we're talking about the same thing, and that a master plan isn't something else. It's just a strategic master plan.
Okay, I take that as a main modification put forward by the council. Okay, thank you. Such strategic master plans should be informed by a technical and design evidence base and include the following: site-specific vision and placemaking principles, master plan setting out the quantum, scale, type, mix and distribution of land uses, housing and community facilities. 3, green infrastructure framework, identifying the scale, distribution, type and design of green spaces, biodiversity net gain, strategic drainage on and off-site linkages. Movement framework, setting out the key access points, strategic highways, street hierarchy and footways and cycleways on and off-site. Urban design framework and design principles, identifying how the site responds to local character and context, and key structuring elements and layout principles, including heights and densities. Sustainability and energy framework, identifying site-wide and building scale opportunities for low and zero carbon. An illustrative master plan layout, and an infrastructure delivery, phasing and management strategy. Yeah, I think I'll take points on all of those points, criteria all at once. So is anyone here to tell me that the master plans shouldn't be informed by any of those things? Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, sir. And no, I'm not going to tell you that the master plan shouldn't be informed by any of those. In fact, from our representations, you'll see that we agree. I just wanted to say a couple of very brief things about the introductory couple of sentences before we get to the individual criterions.
Sure.
So you recall from this morning that that's where I suggested that we move the phrase from the individual site-specific policies relating to situations where applications or master plans had already been submitted. Ms. Fage suggested that she agreed to that, but then suggested that it be retained in the individual policies as well. If those sites SP14 to 19 are going to have to comply with this policy, then I can't quite see the point of having it in both places. That would seem to be unnecessary duplication. That's my first point. And then the second point is really one about the requirement for the landowner developer. And I think we can all read that as landowner developer applicant or whatever party, in collaboration with the council and key stakeholders. And again, we go into this in detail in our statement, so I won't go over that. But stakeholders can mean anything. And the point we were seeking to make was that the responsibility surely is for the landowner developer applicant to work in collaboration with the council, and for the council, the district council, to bring in any key stakeholders that it considers are necessary. Otherwise, the process is a little bit vague. The reason for that is that if those key stakeholders were deemed to involve any party that might be an objection to what was being proposed, then there might be a difficulty for the landowner developer in complying with the requirements of the policy, especially as the next sentence then requires that master plan to be agreed, and it doesn't say agreed by who or how. We have no problem with the landowner developer being required to prepare an application in collaboration with the council and have that then agreed through some part of the process, whether it be adopted prior to submission of an application or in advance of the permission being granted. But we feel that there does need to be a little bit of clarification inserted into those opening few sentences. I hope that's clear, so I'm happy to answer any questions you've got.
This is one area where I think it's going to be helpful to hear from the council now rather than parking it for later. So, Ms. Flage, what do you have in mind here?
Well, as I said before, I'm happy to relocate the wording about where there are live applications on the site. Master plan should be agreed prior to as part of the grant of planning permission. And yeah, you can take two views of there being duplication if we were to keep that sentence in each individual strategic site policy, or whether it just provides clarity. So I don't particularly have a view on that. In terms of the wording of stakeholders, I think a key principle of master planning is that, as set out in government NPPG, is that it's a collaborative exercise. So you are actually meaningfully engaging the community and key stakeholders. So they have an opportunity to inform and shape proposals, which is what the government advises. So I think the preparation of the master plan has to be in collaboration with the council and key stakeholders. But I think we need to be clearer about how the master plan will be agreed in that policy, and that we should say a master plan agreed by the council. So I'd like to retain key stakeholders, but then I'd like to insert agreed by the council.
Okay, so I take that as a main modification put forward by the council. Is that right?
Yes, and obviously previously in the session, I talked about the wording of that part of the policy also being amended to insert significant development. So it says strategic master plans will be produced for sites SP14, SP19 and significant development. So that could be weaved into the same modification.
Okay, so the process here then, as I understand it, is strategic master plan produced by the landowner stroke developer stroke applicant in collaboration with the council and, you say, key stakeholders. I think you said as well, members of the public, and that would be what for the council to identify and bring on board in the collaboration.
Yeah.
I lost you on my screen. You've been sort of popping around a little bit. So.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yes, I mean that's the council's role to coordinate how that's best done, whether it's through the parish council or the best means for doing that, which is tailored to the site and the specific issues of the site.
Yeah. Okay. But the responsibility for agreeing, it says Chris is an agreed master plan.
Yeah, I have got some wording. Do you want me to read that out? So how this policy could be recast?
I don't know.
Or just for clarity.
Right. So are you saying that you have an alternative paragraph to this one?
No, it's not. It's just amending the existing paragraph. So it inserts and significant development alongside sites SP14 to SP19. Yeah. And then it will say, to ensure sites are comprehensively planned and delivered, planning applications should be preceded by and consistent with a master plan agreed by the council.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, no, I'd already noted that as
right. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure it was clear.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
So I wonder if I'd just come in here, just so I'm clear on this. In relation to who is going to be undertaking the collaboration, I think the point that is being raised by the developer is in relation to whether they are going to be required to sort of collaborate with stakeholders, or whether that is going to be done through the council. Am I right in understanding, Ms. Flage, that in relation to the engagement of stakeholders, that will be done through the council?
It would be done through the council. So collaboratively, the developer and the council would agree the best way to engage the community on the master plan, and they would agree the strategy together. And the council might bring in representatives from the community to that process. But then the developer would actually go out and consult on plans with the community. So it's done collaboratively.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just trying to understand what the process of that might be, because just so that we get the wording right. Because at the moment, it seems to me that it's the landowners and the developers have got to collaborate with the council and with key stakeholders. So the collaboration is to be done really by the developer as opposed to the council. And are we really saying that it's to collaborate or to be agreed with the council, who will identify the stakeholders who will then be brought into as part and parcel of the process? Because I'm just concerned at the moment, it seems to be saying that anybody could come forward and say, well, I'm a stakeholder, I want somebody to collaborate with me. And you could have 50, 60, 70 people all being part of that stakeholder group.
Yeah, I think in practice, I think what usually happens is the landowner sits down with the council and they together identify who the relevant key stakeholders are for that particular site, given the issues to be considered. So for instance, if there's a really big, I don't know, biodiversity issue, then the trust will need pulling in to that process, so we can't be specific about it because it needs to be tailored to each site and each master plan. But the key point is that it's done collaboratively with the council working with the landowner.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about clarity. That's all I'm concerned about, is that there is adequate safeguards in place to ensure that this is a process that will in fact work. And as I understand it, what you're actually saying is it's that the council will by invitation invite, because you might have 50 or 60 members of the public, all who are very interested in this, and it would be sensible to have a group of people nominated, as we've got here, a group of people who act on behalf of those individuals, rather than trying to collaborate with maybe 60, 70, maybe 150 people. So I'm just wondering whether the policy should be a bit clearer in terms of setting that out as to how it's actually meant to work in practice, because you wouldn't want members of the public to be misled about the fact that they are entitled to be individually collaborated with, no matter how many there are of them, in relation to the production of a master plan, which could become unworkable for everybody. I just wonder whether we should just, I don't know what you think about that, sir, but whether or not that is something that we should, clearly there needs to be collaboration with the community. It's simply just a question of ensuring that the wording achieves that without being so wide as to be open to interpretation.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to need here is for the council to consider whether that wording is right or whether it needs to be changed. If it needs to be changed, then really it ought to spell things out. Well, just frankly, say what it means. If there are any areas where you might leave me unsure, then it might be that you need to do a little note as well, just to explain that to me. Having said that, if a little note is required, it might be that little note should become a supporting paragraph in the plan itself as well, just to be clear how the policy would operate. So if I can ask you to give some thought to that and get back to me. So if you bear with me a moment. Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you, sir. Just a couple of points on the detail of the wording here. Bearing in mind, as Ms. Flage has confirmed, we're talking about strategic master plans here, so quite big scale on big allocations. So at point 3, I don't have any issue with the green infrastructure wording and strategic drainage, etc. But here it's included biodiversity net gain. Now, trying to work out what biodiversity net gain you have on a site ultimately requires you to have some very detailed plans. I'm not sure if you've been party to this, but there's a government metric and everything has to be measured, all the trees have to be counted, all the hedges, all the proposed planting, etc., to very sort of detailed levels before you can come up with a biodiversity net gain. So I don't think that's appropriate at strategic master plan scale. There's policies elsewhere and national policies requiring biodiversity net gain. I'm not disputing that, but what I'm saying is you won't be able to define that at a strategic master plan scale. So I suggest biodiversity net gain is deleted from item 3. At item 6, this says sustainability and energy framework. I'm afraid people throwing in the word sustainability is a sort of bugbear of mine, because sustainability is an extraordinarily broad and ill-defined term. The plan is to bring forward sustainable development, and all the various policies in the plan are to ensure sustainable development, but to have a sustainability framework in a strategic master plan what's that going to encompass? That could encompass everything that falls under economic, environmental and social terms in the NPPF, i.e. everything in the NPPF. So I don't think a sustainability framework is the right wording there. If we think it's aimed at an energy framework, well, that's extraordinarily tricky to do at strategic master plan scale. And I'd suggest that most of the strategic allocations in North Herts are unlikely to come forward because they're relatively low density and they're on edges of built up areas. That said, it could be looked at, but I'm not sure it's appropriate in the North Herts context. The second part of that then goes on to talk about building scale opportunities. But again, I don't think that's appropriate for a strategic master plan. And indeed, as has been stressed repeatedly by the government, the performance of buildings is set through building regulations and most recently in their future home standard consultation. It's not for a strategic master plan to start getting into the nitty-gritty of which type of renewable energy technologies are going to be appropriate on a strategic allocation. No problem with the aim of this, and it will be controlled by building regs and other policies in the plan, but you're not going to be able to go have a strategic master plan that's talking about which units on the site will have photovoltaics and which might have air source heat pumps. It's not the right scale for that detail. That was my comment, sir.
Ms. Hamilton.
I apologise. I've got a few more extra comments now after that. Okay, right. This might be a bit of a mixture. I'd like to thank Ms. Flage actually for coming back regarding the stakeholders, because I disagreed with Mr. Dixon. So that's really good. But she did mention the word might. Might turns it very woolly-ish. A key stakeholder in some of the sites of this plan would be the Herts and Middlesex Badger Group. We are key stakeholders in a numerous amount of planning authorities within Hertfordshire, including Boxbourne and East Herts and Dacorum. And we would appreciate it if we could be a key stakeholder in regards to North Herts District Council. In regards to Mr. White's comment that he just made about the biodiversity gain, the whole point about the government putting focus now on the defermetric, etc., and the whole reason for having this involved in a plan is so that it can be done at the start of the route, so that it can prove that a site can be a certainty and not a risk. There is no point in doing all this, that, the other, and then getting to a certain point and then going, okay, now we'll do the defermetric, and oh, oops, hang on a minute, we can't go forward with this site. It's just a waste of time, resources, energy, and everything else. It needs to be done at the strategic master planning stage. That's very, very important. And I'd like to draw the attention. It amuses me how comes developers seem to like to quote governments when it comes to being pro-development, but not when it's anything else. So I would like to point out the point that the government stated. There is, okay, so the section 40 of the Natural Environment and the Rural Communities Act places a duty onto planning authorities to conserve biodiversity. They need to embed consideration of biodiversity as an integral part of the policies and decision making, which will then make significant contributions to the government's new 25-year environment plan. So this just highlights the importance of this. So I totally disagree with what Mr. White just said. And we believe that that should be left in. We did have a hearing as well about the importance of the deferometric that I sat in on with the Wildlife Trust there. And I'm sure they would back me on this point, that that needs to be left in the strategic master planning stage. That's all I've got to say on that point for now. Thank you.
Ms. Cottier.
Thank you. Well, if it's not going to be dealt with at the strategic master plan level, and then it doesn't get dealt with in the later master plan level, if the developer is saying now doesn't feel that their responsibility, when would it be dealt with? It wouldn't be dealt with ever, in which case the policy hasn't been effective because it's just frittered out into nothing. And the other thing I wanted to say is where does, if we accept the suggestion that there are special provisions made for developers who have already put in master plans in the form of planning applications, where does that leave a planning application that has a master plan map that overlaps on another planning application in the neighbouring territory, and there's this overlap? Clearly, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place here, because if they cling on to the already lodged planning application, that will be easily seen to be evidence of something unsound, because you can't have incompatible development overlapping with a multitude of key strategic issues involved. On the other hand, if you cancel out that planning application and introduce the idea of resolving it through a later master planning avenue, as what is being suggested essentially by this the policies, the new policies we're discussing today, that would upset the developers, because they would argue, we invested all this time and money lodging this planning application, and now we're going to be sent back to square one, was the words that White Peak Planning Report on behalf of Blur Homes and Crown put in for Matter 31. And they said, we'd be going back to square one. And then they argued that this plan has been 15 years in the making. Now, it hasn't been 15 years in the making. That's a gross exaggeration. It's only been about 6 years from when the plan, this all came online. Prior, the East of Luton site was protected because it had been removed from the previous local plan, and it had been explicitly taken out of the regional spatial strategy because of its proximity to the OMB, and that was 15 years ago. So this idea has been going on, they've been planning for 15 years, isn't the case. It only came on, my son was 1 year old, he's 10 now. I went to the very first land options consultation that the parish council put on for the original site. And we were all discussing whether or not, this was a good, we were asked, we were consulted on land options generally, and that was only 9 years ago. So this idea 15 years, no, this is incorrect. And if they decided all of these, I don't think they should be given special treatment, because if the planners decided to take a risk and put in a planning application before the land which is Greenbelt had been released, and this has been the common practice plan wide. So let's bear in mind, this is not going to be the exception to the rule, but it's going to be affecting mostly all the sites, because all the planners have gone and done this, all the developers have gone and done this. They've all put in premature, you could call it premature, you could call it proactive, it depends which way you look at it, planning applications on various land sites. If they are now saying that, well, therefore we should not be included in this master planning, we should already have what we've put in respected. Well, that's kind of, they're saying, well, it's their problem. They counted they counted their chickens before they hatched. They went and took the risk. Nobody asked them to do that. If I were a developer, I would have waited to find out if the land was actually going to be released or not before I put in a planning application. But you know, I guess it doesn't work that way. They like to show that they're proactively pursuing it and they're ironing things out as early on as possible. But that's not reason enough to make two sets of rules. One set for people who haven't yet put in a planning application and might like to, and ones that have. It should be the same across the board. For a site that is above a certain size, which is, I think, the threshold of 50 that was mentioned earlier. Any things below that, perhaps, you know, are a bit more flexible because they're not as drastic. They're not going to have as drastic impact. But as far as now, how they'll resolve that is, I can't really see a resolution, rock and a hard place. On the one hand, you stick with the planning application you put in, you're a bit stuck because you've overlapped your planning. And I know we had this conversation, we're not allowed to talk about it, but it is a fact, it overlaps, right? Visually overlaps, it's unquestionable. So you stick with that, you're going to meet a problem because it's not, they can't ask you as an inspector to pass a plan that clearly overlaps on two strategic areas. It's just not sound. So they're going to have to alter it. They can't stick with what they've got. They've made a mistake. It's a fact. They've made a mistake. They're just going to have to accept that. And clinging on to a plan that is now needing drastic adaptation fits more in line with what's being proposed through these policies. There's no reason, there's no real basis they can argue that they should be given another option or another category. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Aspinall.
Well, have you ever heard the story about going round in a circle? I get that impression here, and it's the same impression that I got when I read the design plan that was produced, and I went round and round in a circle and concluded that what I'd just read was actually, what did I just read? Can I remember anything that was in it that was of any interest to anybody that was building a house? Hang on a minute, what's happening here? So if I may, I'm just going to make a statement here because the whole thing is terribly frustrating. I'm sure you must be frustrated. What I can't understand is why the council are coming forward on the 11th day, on the 12th day, with this proposal. They've had 3 years to bring it forward. The design plan came out, I'm not sure it was the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020. So they had all last year to come forward with these proposals. And here we are on the last day trying to talk ourselves into doing something which a lot of people are going to find very difficult to understand. It's what's called bureaucracy. So I've listened to the discussion today and I become more and more concerned. Why do I become concerned? I said this morning about the subject of archaeological digs and the written statement of investigation, which has to be done before you can build. And that statement is drawn up by an outside body and it goes on and on and on. The large builders can cope with it. The small builders can't cope with it. We've got one in this village now with 8 houses. It's going to cost them £100,000 to do that. And that's just the beginning. I've just built 2 houses, cost me £85,000 because it went on and on and on. Now, the next thing is the management construction plan, which is in these comments here. This has been dreamt up suddenly. It applies to large developments to produce a management construction plan. But guess what? Every house now that's building, single house, has got to have a management construction plan. Where they're going to park their vehicles, where they're going to store their equipment, how they're going to in and out of the village or into the town. So everything is done that way, right? Have you still got me?
Yes.
I've just had a message, I've got a low battery.
You disappeared very temporarily.
Well, I'm back again. So what we've got here, of course, is that this is a precondition. And preconditions, as I understood it, the government weren't keen on preconditions. This has got to be done before you put in a planning application. It's not something that you... So, in other words, the builder, if he's a small builder, I guess that the council will suddenly find, what is this significant development? Significant development can mean anything. It can be in a place that's significant. It can be by a river. It could be anything. It is not defined. So we're going to spread this out into every possible building. It's typical of North Herts District Council to put in the bureaucracy to make everything very, very costly. And it will become extremely costly for every builder. And the cost then is passed on to the consumer, or in the self-builder's place, he can't do that. So my view is that if you're going to have a system like this, first of all, it should only apply to sites that are big sites. I'm talking about 250 houses plus, not 100 houses, but 250 houses plus. That's what it should apply to. And by doing that, the big builders will be able to cope with that. Otherwise, massive delays. And all this business about stakeholders, well, you've slightly answered it, but Mrs. Flage didn't answer it. She seemed to be thinking that everybody could be involved. And that means long delays, consultation, etc., etc. If somebody's bought a plot of land, it's going to cost them interest on the land that they're buying. And the idea at the moment, as I understand it, is that we want to build houses, not have bureaucracy. So my view, with all due respect to the council, is that this is very wordy. They need to take it away. They need to produce something that's more acceptable to the ordinary guy who's not read the design plan. In ordinary words, very, very simple. Otherwise, nobody's going to read it except North Herts District Council planners and perhaps big builders. But if you exclude those that are not building big estates, so in other words, below the 250 mark, they can live with it. But the others can't. And we want to encourage the small builder in everywhere, because that's the way to get the houses built. I think I've covered everything. But I'm very frustrated. We're just going round and round and round in a circle. Thank you, Chairman. I've had my little rant now.
Thank you, Mr. Aspinall. Mr. Ames.
Thank you very much. I think just a couple of comments, sort of following on from some of the things that have been said already. I think that first and foremost, we support the criteria in policy SP9, and we have no objection to that. I think where we have some comments once we start to talk about thresholds in a little while. But I just, where I have a slight concern is, firstly, obviously there is quite a lot of work to do up front, it's absolutely accepted. But there's the time delays, and what we want to make sure is that this is a sort of a robust exercise that involves the right people, but also it's not governed by any statutory period or anything like that, and it's something which could potentially go on and on. And I just wonder that really looking at an explanatory sentence that encourages the council to enter into an agreement with the developer or landowner, whoever it might be, that they agree the scope of this exercise up front, who the key stakeholders are, so we make sure the right people are involved, but also then it takes sort of confusion out as to how long the process is going to take and everything. So there's a little bit of buy-in from both sides. I think the other point at this stage is really sort of picking up on some of the concerns about how this might apply to a range of sites. And I just wonder whether it may be worth adding sort of a further explanatory sentence that just says that this will be proportionate to the development proposed. So that because there's always the danger in a one-size-fits-all that we could be applying the same criteria to a 2,000 unit main strategic allocation to a 100-unit scheme or a smaller scheme than that. And I just wonder whether some proportionality could be part of that. So we're making sure we're picking up the right points, but necessarily delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ames. Mr. Lowes.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to make a short, discrete point, if I may, about applications for strategic sites that are already with the council. As an observation, these applications have, or at least should have, already taken into account most of the matters in the criteria within the policy, at least as far as they're relevant to the individual site, because they just seem to me to be fairly sound planning principles. Like Mr. Dixon and others, I've no issue with them per se, although equally I wouldn't depart from Mr. White's more detailed comments. The suggestion seems to be, and I might have got it wrong, that where applications have been submitted, applicants should be retrospectively putting together the relevant information submitted with the planning applications, which I referred to before, into a strategic master plan retrospectively. If I'm right, and I'm quite happy to be corrected, I'd really question this as a worthwhile exercise. If on review of the information that the council already has, it's satisfied that the principle of this policy has been met, and in general terms, I don't think one could argue much with the motivations behind the policy. There just seems to be little point in repackaging it just to tick a policy box. And what's more, it would to go against the principle that a master plan process should inform the scheme and not the scheme reinforcing the master plan. The applications that have been in have been subject to quite a bit of public consultation, local authority, they're meticulously put together as they have to be, and the local authority have had the applications for some time. I think now packaging them into a strategic master plan seems to be putting sort of the horse before the cart, really, or cart before the horse. Apologies. Thank you.
Ms. Sananda.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Whether you can retrospectively sort any of these things out, because there's a couple of sites where I'm quite concerned that the transport issues aren't aligned with these statements. But the bricks are the diggers are going in January. Well, they're going in now. So then, given the plan is that sites are now going ahead, what can be done? It would be useful to know if this gets approved and we find that sites have gone ahead without having really complied with some of this, what can we do about them? So the site where I think actually, we weren't consulted as stakeholders, and actually that the cycle infrastructure isn't good enough. If it's about to be built here this month, could we do anything about that, or is that a done deal? And I think it's worth thinking about, should some of the sites that are currently in the system that are about, a little bit further back from that, at least, that we've still got issues with, what should happen with them right now? Should they continue through planning? I mean, it's very difficult for the public half the time to know what's going on and actually catch up with the fact that some of what's going on doesn't align with what's in the plan. But I do think we need to think about, given the state of the plan and how much longer it's got to go through, what happens with these sites that are sort of not really compliant with carrying on.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments on FM 001? Very briefly, Miss Hamilton.
In the council's defence, I don't think I'd say this about North Arts, but I think where they were saying regarding community involvement, I think what we have seen amongst a lot of local plans is when an actual planning application comes to light or it comes up, often the developers will hold some sort of community thing in a local community hall, community hall rather, so that they can have their say and they can put things and say what they like. And I think maybe that's what the council are referring to on this, not that they're going to get a sea of a sea of like different people, like all like, you know, coming in one by one. But I think it's done like that a lot of the time over here. I've been to a few of these community hall things where the planners have put everything out and you can ask questions and you can put your points across.
Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw a line under FM 001. So I hope everyone's clear what I mean by that. In ED 216, the main modification put forward by the council is referenced FM 001. And I'm going to ask the council for its comments on what we've heard, and as I said previously, particularly the suggestions for changes that we have heard so far. Then I'm going to go on to FM 002 and FM 003 together. So is that for you, Miss Flage?
Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the policy wording, we talked about the wording of require and expect master plans and planning applications for significant development. I think on reflection, a sort of proportionate change to that wording would be require as applicable, because clearly the set of design objectives will relate to a wide range of sites in terms of quantum and scale. So to pick up the points made by Mr. Aspinall, who's obviously stating the case for smaller developments and small builders, house builders. So yeah, the council would suggest that change is made to make that policy more effective.
Okay.
The next point was around Ms. Cottier's point on criteria 3. When she was talking about the need to sort of reconcile transport linkages with biodiversity and with nature. So that criteria could be worded integrated with the wider built and natural environment to address her point.
So yeah, it's going to help me. I'm sure it could say that, but I need you really to be clear that if you are proposing,
yeah, we're proposing. Sorry, we're proposing that. We're proposing that word as proportionate.
Okay, if you could just say that again. What was the wording?
It's criteria 3.
Yeah.
And then it's the final sort of sentence, integrated with the wider built and natural environment and communities.
Okay.
And then the next point was around criteria 7, where we talked about the green infrastructure network. That is quite a wordy criteria. And the council would agree that it could be split into 2 as suggested. So the second part of that criteria would become criteria 8, and it would specifically talk about a high quality network of multifunctional green infrastructure to support ecological connectivity, biodiversity net gain and access to nature.
So is that separating out your sport and recreation type stuff from your biodiversity?
And I think as well climate change, adaptation and mitigation, because the government does place a great deal of emphasis on that in terms of the 25-year environmental plan. So I think that would be the right course of action.
Okay.
Then Yeah, we've had this point. It was mentioned in the design criteria, but also the requirements for master plans about management and maintenance. You know, and that's something that shouldn't really be considered in a strategic master plan, because that's kind of dealt with, you know, towards the end of the process. But I think that there's a kind of issue with quite a few of these things, including biodiversity and including sustainability. They need more front loading. To leave these matters to the end of the planning design process means they don't happen, or they don't happen very well. So we need to wire these issues in up front load them. And the National Design Guide actually explicitly talks about well-designed places consider management and maintenance regimes from the early stages of the design process, and that the actual designing of the green infrastructure in terms of, you know, broad location and function should actually be informed by the likely management strategy. So we're not talking about detail, we're just talking about having a strategy. So I think the council would like to leave that criteria as it is.
Yeah, I noticed that you said a strategy there, whereas the policy says plan, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I wonder, for clarity, if it should be the word strategy.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay.
So we've already talked about, haven't we, the wording of the next part of that policy, starting with strategic master plans will be produced.
Yeah.
So shall I just move on to the contents of the strategic master plans, sort of 1 to 8?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Just before you do,
yeah.
Can I just raise one point? Just raise one point. As I understand it, the introduction of the words "where applicable" is to identify that some of the criteria 1 to 10 may not, in certain circumstances, apply to a particular site, which I think is the point that Mr. Aspinall was making. It might be better, and perhaps you'll be happy for us just to take this away, sir, but it might be more appropriate for those words "where applicable" to come after the 2 rather than before the word, rather than after the word "require." But just to make that clear, that it's the criteria that the words "where applicable" are applying to, rather than the fact of the strategic master plan itself. But are you just? I think we understand what the purpose of the amendment is. So, sir, are you happy for us just to take that away and see which way round we think it works best?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Forgive me, Ms. Lodge, I finished. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. I think similarly, in terms of addressing Mr. Aspinall's point about proportionality in terms of those smaller developments that are still captured by the term significant development, we could include the wording, such strategic master plans should be informed by a technical and design evidence base and include broadly the following. Because again, we'd want to look at we want to be able to sort of tailor the master plan requirements to the quantum and scale of the site in question.
Can I come in?
You can.
No, I'm
sorry,
not, no.
That's not my decision.
No, it's not. No, what I'm not going to have is debate going backwards and forwards and all of this.
Okay, don't just say no.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like people to understand why, and that's because hopefully I've given people ample opportunity to tell me what they think should be done. Now I'm hearing from the council. The argument could go on forever otherwise. So I know what everybody else thinks. I want to hear what the council thinks, and then I'll move on once I do. So
yeah.
Yes. Oh, right. Yes. No. You said yes. I'm not sure about the word broadly. To be perfectly honest. But yeah, I think the point is.
Yeah.
Where appropriate might be better, but again, you understand the point, sir. So if you're happy for us to take it away and come up with what we think is the most appropriate wording, then perhaps you can leave that with us rather than us try and do it from 3 different locations on the hoof.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just wanted to get in the principle of that word change.
Bear with me a sec. Ms. Flage.
Yes. So the other point was raised about criteria 3, the green infrastructure framework, which currently says identifying the scale, distribution, type and design of green spaces, biodiversity net gain, strategic drainage on and off-site linkages. We'd like to keep reference to biodiversity net gain in there because that in itself is a key structuring principle, and the ability to achieve net gain is a sort of composite part of the green infrastructure framework that needs to be provided. So in the same way that, technical work will be needed to define the movement framework, so to define your key access points, your strategic highway, your street hierarchy, you're going to have to do some transport assessment technical work to actually pin that down. It's the same now with biodiversity. So instead of it being left to the end of the process and retrofitted in not very well, we want to actually quantify what habitat is on site through a strategic master plan. That's a proportionate thing to do. So we understand the amount of habitat that we have on site and then feed that knowledge into how we can create net gain as part of a wider green infrastructure framework. So we'd like to keep that in for that reason. And it's an important point with biodiversity, because part of the reason we've lost so much of it in this country and we are so nature depleted is because we haven't been front loading it in to the master planning process sufficiently.
I think the part of the concern that Mr. White was raising there is that at that strategic master planning stage, that there wouldn't be the detail, they wouldn't know sufficient detail before the net gain calculation, if I can put it that way, could be done.
Well, no, I would disagree with that. I think the metric could be completed as part of the strategic master plan exercise. I know strategic sites that have had that exercise undertaken to inform the policy allocation, to be clear on that requirement as part of a master plan underpinning an allocation. So I don't think it would be disproportionate to require that as part of the strategic master plan.
Okay.
And then the other point is on sustainability. Again, another thing, another sort of planning requirement that if it's not dealt with up front, cannot really ever happen. So no, we're not asking for detailed, building performance standards, but we do want to understand how a master plan is actually going to be designed to reduce carbon emissions and create more energy efficient developments. So that might be how density is looked at, how transport and active travel is looked at, orientation of blocks to maximise solar gain, the potential use of renewable energies given the site's location and characteristics, and potential climate change adaptation measures. So again, it's at a strategy level, but it's actually pinning down some parameters and principles to then inform more detailed planning applications.
So is this predominantly about energy?
No, I wouldn't say it is. I think sustainability is about energy, and it's about climate change adaptation, and it's about sustainable transport, and it's also about biodiversity. So I think that the purpose of that framework is to pull all the things together at a strategic level to say, how is this master plan actually going to reduce carbon emissions and be more energy efficient through the way people move, etc., etc. And it obviously fits with the council's climate change strategy and action plan that it has in place.
Okay.
So, yeah, those are my main responses to the criteria. Then, yes, we had a point by Mr. Ames about maybe having some more explanatory text on agreeing the process, the master planning process, you know, vis-a-vis a specific site, and how that would be done in principle, which again, would be happy to insert some supporting explanatory text on that, but I can't share the wording of that now.
No. Okay, so Mr. Ames made a few points. One was about, yes, the council and the developer agreeing the collaboration exercise in effect, and also suggesting that wording should be added to say that the collaboration should be proportionate to the development proposed. So I suppose there are two strands there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, are you saying that you agree with both of those points and are suggesting main modifications?
I do agree with both of those points, and we could address that through a main modification as explanatory text to the policy.
Okay.
And the point raised by Mr. Lowes, which is about the retrofitting in effect of existing outline planning application material to policy SP9. So obviously the policy applies at the point of permission, and those applications are still under determination. They have progressed through the planning process, they've been subject to public consultation, etc. But I think the key aspiration for the council is to ensure that we do have an agreed master plan document that is approved as part of those outline permissions as a condition to ensure that we secure design quality post outline. So I would suggest that a retrofitting and almost a reconciliation process is needed, looking at the existing planning application design documentation material. And
you forgive me, I didn't catch that last bit. My fault, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying that for those applications, a sort of a retrofitting and reconciliation process is required. So the design documentation for those outline applications does comply with emerging policy SP9. And I think the criteria 1 to 8 that we've just been discussing, all those elements you would expect to see in an outline planning application if it's been done well. So that information should already be available. So it's a case of sort of packaging it into a clear, concise document. So there's sort of transparency on how the application accords with the policy.
The purpose of that presumably is so that you can tie it down either through a condition or a legal agreement.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's quite common for large outline applications to actually not have very robust design documentation. Quite often there are a set of quite vague parameter plans that don't actually help to secure design quality. And the purpose of this policy is to make sure the council can actually insist on the right design documentation to secure quality. So I suppose that my response there also addresses Ms. Fernanda's point, which he was talking about, sort of how do we deal with existing applications?
Yeah.
So yeah, so sorry, so I'm not proposing any main modifications on the back of that, but that's my response to those issues raised.
Okay, thank you for that. What I'm going to do now then is to, and yes, we are, believe it or not, still on issue 31.1, but I think well, I'm hopeful, let's see if that's misplaced, that I want to look at FM 002 and FM 003 together before moving on to the site-specific stuff. Given that that FM 002 and 003 are really just the supporting paragraphs to the detailed policy stuff that we've just been talking about, I think we've probably covered it all already. But let us see. So FM 002, I am conscious that, well, I certainly want to break rather soon. I dare say others do too. But let's just see how we go with these. So FM 002, then I'm not going to read it out, but this and FM 003, I'll take them both together. So just to be clear, we're talking about FM 002 and FM 003. We have touched on them already. It's currently, at least here, where we see the threshold of 100 referred to, which we have talked about already, and I don't want to go over what we've already said. But how did the council alight upon the 100 figure?
I think Mr. Smith's going to answer that question.
I was just finding the unmute button. Yeah, well, ultimately, obviously, it's a matter of judgment as to where we set it, but the 100 seemed a sensible threshold when we look at the remaining allocations in the plan. It picks up those non-strategic sites or groups of non-strategic sites that we know about in key locations. So for example, we've got north of Baldock as a strategic site, but south of Baldock we also have 2 allocations of around 200, 250 each, which clearly there's merit in doing those. And at 100, yes, we effectively pick up the largest and most substantive of the remaining allocations, including a number of those in the villages where some of the higher levels of growth are proposed. But at the same time, to pick up on Mr. Aspinall's point, obviously it doesn't hoover up every last site in the plan by a long way. There's still, a number of allocations in there from sort of 9 up to 80 odd homes in the towns, the villages, which wouldn't be captured by this policy unless obviously there were sort of clear exceptional reasons for doing so, as Ms. Flager's outlined.
Okay, so without putting words into your mouth, then you say, do you, that a threshold is necessary for effectiveness, for the effectiveness of the policy, and that as a matter of your planning judgment, 100 is a reasonable threshold?
Correct, yes.
Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, sir. Very briefly, nothing on FM 002, but just to note that FM 003 will need amending to reflect the conversation that we've just had in relation to the timing of master plans where applications have already been submitted, collaboration with stakeholders, etc. So nothing new really, but just that FM 003 will need to be amended for consistency. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, I take it that the council, in formulating a detailed MM that it's suggested it's putting forward, will look at any consequential changes as well. Mr. Ames. But yes, thank you for that, Mr. Dixon. Mr. Ames.
Thank you. It was just a comment about the threshold, and really it's just about resources, and this does impact on the soundness of the plan, I think. As we know, the plan does, in its housing trajectories, does rely on a lot of the non-strategic sites coming forward in the earlier phases once the plan is adopted. And just having a quick cursory look through the community section of the plan and sort of building in the town centre sites, which might be included in this exercise, probably looking at maybe 18, 20 sites that would be caught by this threshold, plus the strategic sites. And as we know, there is a need for these sites to come forward quite swiftly. And what really my concern is about this is around time and resources, particularly when looking at the appendix to the council's submission, looking at some of the process, the different parts of the governance with members and so forth that are involved. And I don't dispute that these people and these stakeholders and these groups need to be involved. But I just wonder, looking at the resources, whether the sheer number of sites that this would capture, particularly early on in the plan, once it's adopted, is going to place a real strain on resources and governance time, and then could subsequently lead to delay. And in fact, frustration to those involved, be it community groups, whatever, if the process isn't running very swiftly. So go back really to the suggestion that was made earlier today about perhaps giving some more focus, getting an understanding of what reasonably can be done with the resources that are in place, both from a governance point of view and a staff perspective, and highlighting those sites which are thought to be the most important and therefore the ones which should go through this exercise, rather than this blanket threshold of 100, which I just cannot see how any authority, this isn't anything about North Herts so much, but any authority would be able to deal with this amount of strategic master plans, particularly early on in the plan process. So what I would advocate is that what the council does in its community section of the plan, it goes through those sites which are deemed to be of most significance. In our representations, I highlighted that if LG21, for example, was to come forward, that's one town centre site, really important that master planning process is undertaken with all of the various parties involved, rather than a blanket which could then prejudice the soundness of the plan because of the delay that will cause in the sites coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Solander.
Yeah, I just want to sort of go back to the point earlier when I talked about a motor owner's site and the issue, and the council had read back, I think, the second paragraph here, which talks about placemaking for more than one site to achieve good planning outcomes. I think there's two different situations here. There's where two sites are close together and you're trying to get perhaps two landowners to work well together, maybe with the situation you've got in Luton. But actually we do have, and I don't know if we're unique in LG6 being like this, we have a site with two different owners and they're not working together. So I suppose my question is, what is a site? Is LG6 actually 2 to 3 sites? And that, you know, I think that needs to be just brought home, because I would like a bit of master planning on that site, because we've got two site owners for what's considered one site, not actually working as well together as we might like them to be to actually bring community outcomes. So I would like the words "or multi-ownered site" or something brought into it somehow. Those words. That it's probably not the best English. It's not my hot topic, but something like that in there. And the other thing is, I wonder if a criteria for deciding what needs planning is something like its sustainability improvement potential, because that would pick up, I think, where David Ames is talking about the town centres or places like that, or there's certain places which have huge potential for bringing us sustainability benefits, more so than others. And actually, it's those that we want to see really well planned. So I don't know if that could be in the criteria. I mean, I kind of like that criteria brought out into a list actually that's in that paragraph, you know, to make it easier to see. But I'd like the sustainability potential brought out if we can.
Thank you. Mr. Aspinall.
Well, I associate myself with Mr. Ames. There's no doubt that the question of personnel in the North Herts District Council will be put to test based on 100, but also, of course, the cost, the proportionality of the cost between doing a scheme like this for 100 as against doing it for 250, most likely is the same. But the division of that cost on each house will be higher in the estate for 100. And I think that the council really are looking at the large development, which has got the ponds, the open green spaces and such. And so, as Mr. Smith said, it was a judgment. I'm going to stick to my judgment of 250. But I go along with the comment that Mr. Ames made. If Mr. Smith and his colleagues go away and have a look at these 18 developments that need to get going now and have a really good look at them and then come forward with a better judgment.
Is that a legacy hand, Ms. Sananda?
No, I just wanted to come back on that, on whether the scale of the problem. I think the council's already put in things saying, you know, as appropriate. It may only be we need to look at the transport or something else on these smaller sites. And I don't think we should just remove the idea of master planning bits of them. You know, quite often it's not the whole thing I want to see. I understand that we can't impose certain things on the site, but I think to have a master plan for at least the bit that really matters, even if it's only 35 houses, to get it right for the people of the town, it's not an unacceptable thing to ask for. So.
Okay. Mr. Aspinall, are you indicating there?
Very quickly, of course, what has just been said in terms of any planning application and the planners going through that planning application, whether it be a site for 2 or whether it be a site for 100, if there are some issues, then the council has every right to come forward in discussion and present conditions. And that could be based on whatever, but not to have the cost of this arrangement forced upon them. But conditions still can apply.
Okay, is there anything else on FM 002 or FM 003 before I hear the council's reply and then take a break? Ms Hamilton. You're on mute, Miss Hamilton.
How would a stakeholder or a want to be stakeholder go about being able to communicate with the council as a stakeholder regarding the local plan? It's a bit of a strange one, sorry.
So you're asking me?
Well, I'm asking whoever.
Just anybody.
You or them would be good.
Okay. Anything else on FM 002 or 3? Right, I'll go then to what the council has to say on what we've heard on those, and then take a break. So, Ms Flage.
I think Mr. Smith is going to respond to those points.
Okay, Mr. Smith.
I will do briefly. I mean, hopefully Mr. Nanda in a way encapsulated the point I was going to make, that yes, we've talked about proportionality really, haven't we, already? And we've talked about adding words like as applicable and, you know, broadly requiring, although you didn't like that precise wording. And I think it's about being clear that this isn't a sort of rigid straitjacket approach that will apply to every single scheme from 100 upwards. Obviously, what's in SP9, I think, you know, we'd expect obviously strategic sites to do that, but below that, there's clearly a case and a process for basically tailoring those to the circumstances in each instance. And it may be that certain matters are filtered out, and it may be that certain matters in that range in between are given greater emphasis in the process. I'm not sure it's for the local plan examination to prejudge, because that's part of the process as you get into pre-application or even pre-application, and then the application itself. It's an ongoing process.
Ms Sananda's point about when you do have two sites close together, is there does there need to be something in the local plan that makes it ensures that their master planning is more cohesive?
There's a reference into, and Ms. Flage may want to chip on this, there's a reference to cumulative already. I think I take Ms. Sananda's point about whether the word allocations should appear in there somewhere to sort of stop carving up of sites to sort of dip under the threshold. I don't think if that's effectively the concern. Obviously, yeah, where we've allocated sites on the whole, we've kind of considered them as a single site. If they're then getting sort of chopped up and brought forward in piecemeal pieces, then we'll look at that. But that's something I think we can look at, we can take away and look at in the detailed wording of the supporting text.
Right, so you're referring, I think, to the sentence that says, in some circumstances, a master plan may need to consider the cumulative impact and coordinated planning and placemaking of more than one site to achieve positive planning outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's meant to address that situation.
Okay. And I think finally, yes, Ms. Hamilton's point, which was about, how does someone, well, in short, how does someone get to be a stakeholder?
Well, I would advise them to speak to their ward councillor and express their desire to be involved in the shaping of the master plan proposals.
Make yourself known.
Yes.
Which I think is what Miss Hamilton has just done. Right, okay. So I'm going to draw a line then under FM 002 and 3. I'm going to take a break now and move all the way to my issue 31.2, being the second issue of the day on my agenda. So I make it 3:40. I'll adjourn the hearing to resume at 4 o'clock. Thank you.
Oh, I'm on mute. Unmute. Yeah. On Zoom.
The meeting's live, Inspector.
Thank you very much, Mr. Franklin. Okay, it is now 4 o'clock, and so I resume the hearing. As I said before the break, we're going to go now then to issue 31.2, and that is about FM004, policy SP14 and site BA1. Yeah, so this is the first of the site policies, and the proposed modifications are pretty similar in relation to them all. In relation to this one then, are these proposed main modifications necessary for soundness, and are they in and of themselves sound? Is anyone here to tell me that they're not? Mr. Stafford.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Sorry, it took a while to locate the hand symbol there. No, I'm not here to tell you they're not sound, and obviously it's a matter for your own judgment based on what you've heard through today, whether the amendments to policy SP9 or any of the following are required. Just really to comment, we on behalf of Hertfordshire County Council as landowners at this particular site have continued our dialogue with North Herts throughout the hearing sessions, including after the publication of these recent further modifications, and are relatively comfortable with the intention of the changes. There's obviously been discussion, and I think it sounds like another modification upcoming to move the specific requirements related to applications which obviously you are probably aware from earlier sessions is the case here at Baldock. So we have a comprehensive suite of information. Nothing that we have heard within this specific policy necessarily concerns us. There's just one point that I would like to make, which we didn't actually include in our written statement, but hopefully you're happy to listen to, just in terms of the mixed-use local centre towards the end of the policy wording. Can understand the reason for the change wording here, given the change in the use class order recently, I think back in September. So we've got convenience retail provision instead of Class A, and there's a proposal for comparison retail provision instead of other A-class uses. That obviously narrows things down quite substantially to what would have previously been other A-class uses. So would suggest considering the use of, instead of comparison retail provision, other E-class uses, brackets A, B, C. But that would be the only change that I would suggest, sir.
Okay, anything else on FM004? Very good. In which case then, is this Mr. Smith? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's for you, Miss Flage.
No, it's for Mr. Smith to
For
answer
Mr.
that.
Smith. Oh, okay, I see. Okay, yeah, so I'll take the council's reply on that and then move on to FM005. Mr. Smith.
Sorry, could I ask Mr. Stafford to repeat? My sound was in and out.
Yeah, correct me if I've got this wrong, Mr. Stafford. Mr. Stafford was suggesting that rather than convenience, rather than comparison retail, the policy should say other E-class uses, otherwise that narrows down the range. Have I got that right, Mr. Stafford?
Yeah, that's correct. Obviously, the other A-class use would have opened things up beyond comparison retail. The nature of the local centre may not be wholly suitable for purely comparison retail alongside the convenience space. So, just really for the flexibility, noting the changes in the use classes order recently. So, other E-classes uses we would propose instead of comparison retail provision. That's E-class uses brackets A, B, and C to narrow it down to what were the previous A-class uses.
Yeah, I think our approach when we had the use class session, wasn't it, was that we sort of had textual references to precise use classes because there were some concerns around obviously just references to E being too open. But yes, I take the point that you're right, that the original reference to 500 square metres of class A1 would obviously encompass both convenience and comparison. So we just need to look at the wording of that and make sure it's consistent with the other mods we've got coming out the back of the use class change session last year.
So is that to say you're going to look at that and there's a potential modification there?
Yeah, there is. I appreciate we had mods coming out of that other session around the use class order on policies that aren't up for discussion today. So I think we'll just check it for consistency. But it looks like there's an issue.
Yeah, I can't off the top of my head recall what the outcome of that was. It feels like some time ago now already. Okay, good. I will move then to issue 31.2. Yeah, that's FM 004. Sorry, issue 31.3, my apologies. And that is, yeah, FM 005. Which is site LG1. And the same question here, and I can see that Mr. Ames has a quick trigger finger this afternoon. Mr. Ames.
Just to say, sir, we absolutely support the modifications included there.
Thank you. Ms. Sananda.
Mine's a quick one in relation to a point I made earlier about whether the school needs to be on site or just an extension of one of the existing schools. I wonder if point C might benefit from the removal of the word on site to give the council flexibility on actually where they want that provision produced in supplied in the end. I know it's not a red point, but it sort of relates to something I raised earlier.
Ms. Cottier.
Thank you. I'm just looking at it, and it's I know it's not in red, but I think it should have been changed and highlighted in red, where it says E, the approach to trees and hedgerows around and within the site, with the presumption that trees will be retained and any hedgerow losses kept to a minimum. Wasn't that supposed to be changed to reflect wouldn't that need to be changed to reflect the changes that were agreed for SP12, and any X, the buffer issue that they discussed, the hedgerow buffer issue that they discussed just prior to, I think it was in the biodiversity session that Nikki Hamilton brought up last hearing sessions, and it was resolved that there would be a 12-foot buffer, and that would be a main policy, and then that would feed into all the individual sites. So that doesn't reflect that agreed modification. Or I think originally it was a 12-foot buffer, and then there was some kind of modification that took it away, that was put in last minute, and that was when I think the Wildlife Trust said we would have objected had this have been the case at the beginning. The hearing was then held. Nikki was present. I listened in, but I wasn't in the hearing. I listened in, and then it was finally agreed that these buffers should be reinstated. Don't know, Nikki will know more about it because she was in the hearing at the time.
Yeah, sure. Just a quick point. What I'm not going to do is set a precedent where we start talking about other stuff, i.e. the stuff that's not in red. That having been said, I think in this instance, both Ms. Sananda and Ms. Cossier have raised two decent points there. So is there anything else, first of all, from anyone else on FM 005 before I look to the council? Okay, is that for you, Mr. Smith?
It probably is, yes, on these broader points. On the education, the council would wish to keep that at the moment. Obviously, that requirement is in there at the request and with the agreement of the county council as the educational authority. Obviously, I'm aware that a 2FE primary school is their preferred operational model. I don't think we should take it out sort of without them here. That said, on Ms. Sananda's point, obviously, if through master planning processes or any change in the council's position down the line that led us to change that position, that there is scope to, because it'd be another material consideration at the point the application was considered. But certainly the advice of the education authority is that there should be a 2-form of entry primary school to meet the needs arising from that site.
Yeah, so just, I don't know if I need to explain your unless material considerations indicate otherwise point there or not. That's the starting point for determining a planning application would be the policies are as a legislative requirement. The local plan policies are the starting point for considering a planning application, and application should be decided in accordance with the development plan policies unless material considerations indicate otherwise. That's more or less verbatim what the legislation says, and what Mr. Smith is in effect saying there, Mr. Nanda, is that because the policy says on site, if there was a material consideration to indicate otherwise, which the sort of situation that you point out may be, then it would be, well, the council wouldn't necessarily be hamstrung by the policy. So I hope that just to explain my understanding of what Mr. Smith was saying there. Mr. Smith.
And I think similarly on the second point, I note the point made about buffers and so on, but again, obviously the plan's to be read as a whole. So the requirement for any buffers would apply here. And obviously that earlier modification in black text is quite clear. There's a presumption that trees will be retained and any losses kept to a minimum, obviously recognising on strategic whole sites in general, sometimes you do need to punch a gap through for roots or for any other purpose really for the proper master planning or design of the site.
Okay, I think that the main point there being, just because it's not specifically in this policy, the policy that it is in still applies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so yeah, that wouldn't be lost through the application process. Yeah, Ms. Hamilton, I did ask for any other comments on this before going back to the council. Very briefly.
I'm confused. As I heard my name, so that's why I come back on. I was studying the local plan document to bring it up when we got to GA2, to be honest with you. And she mentioned the point about things to do with, we did have a hearing back in the start of December, and some things were supposed to be put back in place. I've just gone through the local plan and they don't seem to have been put back in, or they're not right. And that worries me somewhat. Are the council supposed to have completed the modifications from the
No.
November, December hearings?
From my recollection, yes, I have enjoyed Christmas since then, but from my off-the-cuff recollection, the council did propose during the hearing some further modifications. Those are among the modifications that the council is currently drawing up, and that will be consulted on again after the hearings, or it's probably some point later this month or a little after that.
Okay, I'm only asking because it was agreed at the hearing certain things would be put back in place, and I've just checked on those things and they're definitely not.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. You won't see them yet because along with a bunch of other stuff, including the main modifications that the council has today put forward, that those modifications will being written, being drawn up for consultation.
Right, okay, so if they don't happen, then I can question it with the council or something?
What happens is that the council will present me in the first instance with a schedule of the modifications that it has put forward during the hearings, and I will go through those to make sure that everything that the council said it would do, it has done. They will then go out to consultation. If the council has missed something, then I would, and if I've also missed it too, then I would fully expect people to start shouting in response to the consultation.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, I did panic. I was thinking, why they got the word they could possibly use a metric calculator. I'm thinking, hang on a minute. Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you, council.
Okay. Which takes us then to issue 31.4. That's FM 006. And site NS1. Yeah, just across these, I very nearly forgot. I meant to mention this actually on the first one. So yeah, in each of these, there's a standalone sentence that says any application on part of the site will be assessed against its contribution to the strategic master plan and will not prejudice the implementation of the site as a whole. I just wondered whether that should say must not. It's a small point.
I think it probably means the same, but we're happy to change it to must not as opposed to will not. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, like I say, it's a small change, but it just sits a little oddly with me. I don't know if it's just me, but
yeah, no, I think you may be right. So yeah, we'll take that point away.
Okay. Anyone else on FM 006? Okay. I'll go then to issue 31.5. FM 007. And that is site HT1. And the same questions there. Ms. Cottier.
Yeah, the same wording is used on each of these, and then the bottom part differs slightly, although most of the time it doesn't. So I'm looking at the order that is agreed in these policies, and it says that again it's saying a master plan should be agreed prior to or as part of the grant of planning permission. So which is it? prior to or part of. It's a bit confusing, because if it's prior to, it's not a part of. Part of the grant planning permission is far later down the line. So the wording seems a bit conflicted there. And that kind of carries on through all of them. Can't be prior to and then also a part of.
Mr. Lowes.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get my hand down. I think it already is. Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm not going to repeat the points I made earlier about master plans, but just to underline the point, similar point to that raised by the gentleman from the county about clarifying that the neighbourhood level retail facility should be Class E. That's really all it is in terms of our representations.
Yeah, and that's the point Mr. Smith said that the council were going to go away and have a look at. I assume, Mr. Smith, that you'll look at that across the board.
Yeah, we can look at all of them to make sure they're consistent with what was agreed at the previous session.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else on issue 31.5? Okay, and Mr. Smith, yeah, Ms. Cottier's point.
Ms. Page can pick this one up, but I think it says "or" in there is quite key. It says should be agreed prior to or as part of the grant of planning permission. So it's just giving us two routes to approving the master plan.
So if it's a live planning application, the strategic master plan could be approved during the determination period of the application, or when it's granted as a condition.
Just thinking about this, I suppose either way it's going to need to be tied into the planning permission, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it could be both. You might have already agreed it in some way ahead of granting planning permission. Might you? Might have informally agreed it, I suppose.
Yeah, we might obviously. A number of councils have a system where they'll agree a master plan as a material consideration for development management purposes. That's not unusual.
Okay. Either way, I think that the main point here is that it does get tied down as part of the planning permission. That's probably the crucial point, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's, sorry, can I speak in response to what you just said?
Can I speak? Yes.
Thank you. That's where the council would like to add a sentence to each of the strategic site policies that follows that wording to say adherence to the strategic master plan will be secured through conditions and or legal agreement. So that is explicit.
Yeah, is that already in SP9?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's just for clarity and effectiveness.
For XXX, the third 4XXX, says that they'll be secured through planning obligation, documentation, conditions, 106 obligations. It's really whether that needs to be in the policy because that's the only way to secure it. So there is no other means. So it probably doesn't. Whether it needs to be in the policy or not is probably a moot point.
Yes, because frankly, you can do that anyway, can't you? But Yeah, I mean, and it's already in SP9, but either way, yeah, whether it needs to be in the plan at all, whether it needs to be in SP9, whether it needs to be here or here and in SP9, perhaps if the council would just give a little bit of thought to it.
Yeah, what's best?
For my part, I think it should be somewhere for effectiveness reasons, even though the council could do that in any event. I think it ought to be in at least one of the policies. Okay, anything else on 31.5? Okay, I'll go then to issue 31.6. That's FM 008. And that's site GA2. And the same questions. Ms. Hamilton.
Can I just clarify, not being a planner or anything, this last bit, any application on part of the site which will be assessed against its contribution to strategic master plan, right? Yeah, and will not prejudice the implementation of the site as a whole. Is that on the basis that if a site has got lots of different developers? Is it? Oh, so a really big site then.
It's to cover that possibility that you have a strategic master plan that covers the whole site, but then you get a planning application that is for just part of the site, and the point of that sentence is to make sure that that application, that the proposals in it conform with the strategic master plan and don't mess up the whole thing, if I can put it that way.
Okay, well, other than the fact that we don't think it's sound anyway, we're quite happy with that modification. Thank you.
Okay, anything else on 31.6? Okay, I'll go then to issue 31.7. That is FM 009 and sites EL 1, 2 and 3. Ms. Cotier.
Thank you. So Zaid is going to talk about some of the research that he's done. He's booked in to talk, but he doesn't have a link of his own, so he's going to come here. Is that okay? And
that is fine. I've seen the email, Ms. Cotier, that to your agreement to Zaid taking part. I think I should just. I mean, the fact that you're invited along probably suggests that you are, but just to triple check that's fine by you.
Yeah, it's fine by me. And if he comes and sits here, it will just mean something won't go wrong with the linking it in and all that. Yeah. So, but I'll just say a couple of brief things to contextualize.
If you bear with me just one moment, because we are, to put it in simple terms, using the council's internet. I just need to triple check that the council is happy with that.
So yes, on the basis that you've secured the mother's consent, we are content that a child should speak to you.
Thank you for that.
Okay, so he's done some project work, but it's involving measurements in centimetres and metrics. So, and he's prepared something, and we've kind of incorporated into his applied maths this week because he's doing homeschooling, obviously, as all the kids are. So, do you want to come and sit down? Okay, go on.
Hello, Zaid.
Hello.
Are you all right? Yeah. Are you sitting comfortably there? Excellent. Okay. So yeah, if you tell me the things that you wanted to tell me, that'll be brilliant.
Measuring roads and cars. On the master plan map for East of Luton, there are 3 roads. The roads are Ely Bottom, Stony Lane and Chalk Hill. Out of those 3 roads, Chalk Hill is the widest. Last night I went out with the tape measure and measured Chalk Hill. We took some photos of the measurements. We started at the top and measured 5 points until we reached the end, where the road meets the bottom road. The measurements for the road's width were 301.8 centimetres, 298 centimetres, 283.7 centimetres, 301.7 centimetres, and 298.0 centimetres. The average width was 296.64 centimetres. The road called Chalk Hill is one of the largest access road. I also measured the mouth of the road opposite the large village green. It measured 404 centimetres. Then when you walk further along it, it gets narrower. My grandmother's car is an average small car, a Mini Cooper. I measured it. The wing mirrors measured 25.8 centimetres each. The width was 178 centimetres. Therefore, the total width of the small car is 229.6 centimetres. My granddad's car is a large Range Rover. The wing mirrors are 28.5 centimetres each. The car width, including both mirrors, is 243.1 centimetres. 2 cars side by side equal 229.6 centimetres plus 243.1 centimetres, and that equals 472.7 centimetres. That does not include space between them though. If the 2 cars pass, they will not fit on the road. The width of the road was an average 296.64 centimetres. So 296.64 centimetres, which is the road, take away 472.7 centimetres, which are the 2 cars, equals minus 176.06 centimetres. Therefore, the conclusion is that the widest road is 176.06 centimetres, too narrow for the 2 cars to pass. People need to be able to get in and out on these roads. If they cannot, it will be dangerous. See the photographs of the crushed car on Stony Lane. The roads are too narrow. It is a bad plan.
Thank you very much. Oh, Zaid, very, very well done. And I hope either your teacher or your mum are giving you a special reward for all the hard work you put into that. Well done. Thank you very much.
Bye bye everyone. Thanks. So yeah, his teacher knows about this, and he'll be able to see it, and he was pleased to see him applying his homeschooling to something real life. So that was good.
Good, excellent. And yes, okay. So was there something, Ms. Cossier, that you wanted to say on this one as well?
Yes, there was, and I was hoping my colleague David Dorman would also be able to step in and provide his own first-hand account of what occurred, because it was his vehicle that this occurred to on those roads. But before that, I've done sort of an outline drawing from the actual master plan map, just a hand drawing, and it's like a big cross. It's a bit like, it looks like a flag with a big cross. So the roads, the road that goes right through the middle is Chalk Hill, and then Lily Bottom basically cuts through. So it's sort of like a wiggly cross. And then if you can imagine a square with a cross going through, EL3 is the bottom left, EL1 is the bottom right, and then EL2 is the top right on the side of it, and then the sort of the cross in the middle is where Chalk Hill crosses with Lily Bottom, and then on the outside where the flagpole would be, that's Stony Lane. So all of the roads into the settlement, no matter which one you go, are narrow country lanes, and this presents particular physical realities, which my colleague David Dorman, if that's still okay, his hand is up, wants to describe to you firsthand what happened to his vehicle a few years ago, well, a year or so ago, I'm not sure how many years it was, but it was recently.
Can I just double check? So, yeah, I mean, obviously I know that on this basis, as well as others, lots of other things as well, you object fundamentally to the site. But are you saying that the sort of the road width issue is something that should be picked up or dealt with through the master planning?
I'm saying that it would have to be dealt with, yes. Can it be dealt with? Probably not, but you're welcome to try and make all of these roads 2 meters wider in their entirety, and they're long roads and they would be used to access it, and whichever way you come in, it cannot be avoided that these roads, I thought to myself, would they be proposing perhaps a one-way system, because with roads that size the only option is a one-way system. But I don't think you can impose a one-way system, because it would affect the neighbouring villages that use that road that are not mangrove green, Cockenhigh and Tea Green, wouldn't then be able to, if they were on the wrong side of the road one-way system, effectively they'd have to go all the way round just to go to a village what maybe is 2 meters down the road ordinarily. So anyhow, it's a master plan issue only if they intend to widen the roads in entirety. And they're long roads, but I know they've got hedgerows either side of them and banks. And the road just described was the widest of those 3 roads, so the others are even more narrow. Anyway, the result was that there was a crushed car and a near death. So I think it's sort of worth pointing out here that it's a health and safety issue, really. And I don't know whether that gets dealt with in a master plan. Probably would have to be. Can it be, or only if it's possible to resolve it? I'll let David describe it. I wasn't there, but it happened to him.
Thank you. Mr. Dorman.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't realise Carolyn was going to do this to me. I wasn't driving. Am I muted? No.
I can hear you.
And I don't really want to go into great detail. It's just, yeah, it's my wife was driving. These roads are just not suitable. They're passing places roads. You have to be very careful with 2 cars. With a heavy goods vehicle or a school bus, it's an impossibility. And my wife had to crawl out of the passenger window against the hedge where she was up against it. And she was really worried for her life, frankly. But that's about all there is.
I've seen the photos, yeah.
Yeah, it was a write-off. I just wanted to raise a couple of other points, if I may. I notice in the red documentation here, it talks about the applications already submitted to the council would need to be have to have the strategic plan agreed prior to it as part of the grant of planning applications. So that brings me back to the point I made before about law homes and Crown Estates planning applications which are 4 or 5 years old now, and also the point to ask them if they know when Luton is going to do what the Luton inspector said had to be done and included in his main modifications, and which is in the Luton Plan policy as LLP 40, which is to carry out a review of their plan to start in 2019 and be completed by mid this year, because that has a fundamental effect on the whole of the housing need for Luton and this area.
I'm not.
I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, forgive me, Mr. Dunman. I'm not. I mean, I've heard a lot about this, as you'll appreciate. I'm not going to hear points about Luton reviewing the plan and housing need and that kind of thing. Again, not least of all because all of the interested parties aren't here today, and also because it's not on my agenda. But you know, I do well have that point. In terms of then this policy, before I go to the council for their reply, is there anything else under issue 31.7? Ms. Sunander.
It's sort of, I suppose, an overarching one really that I'm sort of wondering about. I spoke to my local councillors at a surgery recently about plans for GP surgeries, and they said, oh, it's all going to be moved to the town centre and we're not going to have surgeries out on estates. And then this morning we've sort of talked to, you know, we touched on the idea that retail's changed and, you know, this plan's quite out of date now. I mean, the local plan is clearly going to sit on top of the master plan. So these lists we've just been going through, SP 14 to 19, will guide how developers' time is spent in producing a master plan. But clearly these have been getting out of date with the thinking as, you know, as the planning process has been going on. So I suppose my question and hope really is the local plan going to be swiftly updated once passed in terms of SP 14 to 19 to get these lists actually in a state where they are going to allow the developers to use their time constructively to plan something that we want, you know, and need? Or, you know, so is that not going to be 3 years down the line because these sites will be being developed? So I suppose that's my question. Is there something needed here about how quickly this is going to get relooked at once the plan finally gets passed?
Forgive me, I didn't follow the point, Mr. Nanda.
Well, my point is that actually if you're in the reality of living in this, you know, here and now in this town, and you ask a councillor about some of the issues, you know, and some of the things on this list, they immediately come back and say, well, yeah, the moment the plan gets passed, we're going to relook at that and sort it out because it doesn't align with our thinking. So if I go back to the earlier one, we're going to have a GP surgery on LG1. But actually, if you talk to any councillor now, they'll tell you that we're not going to have a surgery on LG1. We're just going to have a town centre combined surgery. So you immediately think, well, what we don't want is the developer of LG1 planning in and giving land to a GP surgery that's not going to be needed. So part of me says, are we swiftly going to get SP 14 to 19 brought into light, you know, with where we are today, given this plan was written so long ago and it's not actually in line with what people want anymore, to ensure that actually we're not wasting developers' time and drawing things into the master plan that actually, in reality, we don't want anymore. Does that make any more sense?
Well, yeah, it does. And I think it's that there are probably two things here. One is if there is something in the local plan that is out of date, then that would be a material consideration that might indicate the council deciding a planning application slightly differently to what the local plan policy might say. And the second point is that, as you're aware, the council is putting forward a policy committing to an early review of the local plan in 3 years. That's I think that's right, by 2024.
That's a long way down the line, though, isn't it? A lot of these sites will be quite way into planning by then if they're going to be delivered.
So are you suggesting a change then to these policies?
Well, if it's got to be 3 years until you can look at SP 14 to 19 to actually bring them into the sort of reality of what's really wanted on those estates, then do we have to get them sorted now? That's my question. That's where I'm coming from. Because it's hard to imagine when we can't fill the shops in the town centre that we're really going to want to build all this retail space. And if we're already planning to use the town centre for GP surgeries, as we are in Letchworth, I don't know what other towns are doing, then why are we planning to give, Greenbelt land to a GP surgery? And if we are considering that we might have a different school solution that isn't on site, but actually expanding a school, I don't know if they will or they won't, then why don't we sort that so that, in our case, the Heritage Foundation can plan for what's really needed on a site, and perhaps we can save some Greenbelt, from building community facilities that might not be wanted. That's what's, and I don't know if I hope I haven't gone too far off course of the master planning, but that's what master planning should be to me. It's about getting the right things on the site or on the into the areas surrounding the site, not just onto the site, to actually allow for the increase in population. And 3 years down the line, I can just see we'll be too far gone to actually to sort this out. Given we know it's already, I have these conversations and I said, don't worry about that. It's, we'll change that once the plan's got through. And you just think it's very hard for us to come in and take part in this when we're talking about something that our councillors won't necessarily engage with us, because they say, well, we'll be changing that. It's just difficult, to be able to engage effectively with this when we're having to talk about something that our councillors just aren't really engaging with us on.
I mean, I suppose the only other comment that I can make on this is that I'm appointed to examine the soundness of the local plan and not to scrutinise what a local councillor may or may not say.
But I suppose I'm saying to you that actually it strikes me this isn't sound if I'm having to discuss with you stuff that in reality I don't actually think is ever going to happen. Because it's already out of date with the thinking. But what I don't want to see, I mean, I know where we're at, that you've got to look at what was given to you a few years ago. My concern is that it's not going to be sorted out for 3 years. And by that stage, people like our Heritage Foundation will have spent a lot of money trying to draw up master plans for a list that might already, we know, to be wrong. And that's, I'd rather the Heritage Foundation were using its funds, to work on the deprivation and things in the town that it's meant to be doing, rather than keep redrawing plans up. And I'm sure they would too. So I'd like this list, I suppose, if we don't update anything fast, I think SB 14 to 19, there should be, within 3 to 6 months of this plan coming through, should be updated and sorted out to not waste Greenbelt that's not needed to be wasted on facilities that perhaps we no longer think's wanted, and to get this right. So I'd like a 3 to 6 month review of these sections. I think that's what I'm thinking.
A 3 to 6 month review.
Yeah, 14 to 19. Get it sorted fast.
You can't, just simply write a different policy and then call that part of your local plan. It has to go through an examination like this one.
Well, perhaps that means we need to sort it now then. I mean, it just seems crazy. I mean, perhaps I'm just a bit late here, but it just seems crazy to be planning for things, retail space that we're hardly likely to fill. I don't know what the solution is in the planning terms, but, as a member of the public, I just want my taxpayers' money used effectively and I want my Greenbelt saved if I can, not built on for stuff that we don't need.
Okay, well, I'll ask the council to reply to that point, to those points.
Yeah. I mean, in policy SP9, in the supporting tab.
Yeah. My apologies. I will ask you to reply to them, but not just now.
Sorry.
I'll take the other points first of all, and then sort of deal with it comprehensively, so that you can deal with it comprehensively. Ms. Cotier.
Thank you. This proposal of a 3-year review as a solution is actually quite unbelievable, because we've just been talking for nearly 3 years, trying to iron out the problems, and so at the end of all of that hard work, I would hope that we would have made some progress to actually address the things that have been raised. And the idea of just postponing it now for 3 years, giving a window of 3 years of unnecessary damage to take place and then be too far into the game to stop, as what we've seen with Luton. Now, we're working from a severe disadvantage here because although the Luton plan was supposed to have been reviewed, it's not only about numbers, it's all about the policies that are cross-boundary and strategic inside that plan, and the various airport proposals that have come forward since this started, and they are all by absolute definition strategic. And the word that's been added prior to master plan in red is strategic. So it's supposed to be a comprehensive and deliverable strategic master plan. And yet, in his own words, Councillor Levitt's representation to the airport expansion, as well as the local development, the local application for the various stuff going on in the park next door to this EL1 site, has not been addressed in any way. And in his response, he lists all the items, all the strategic issues that haven't been addressed. So what's happened is they've not been addressed, and now what's being proposed is that that they never get addressed, and that 3 years will go by and then there'll be an early review. You're talking to people who have suffered the consequences of their own areas plan being conditioned to an early review, and that not having taken place. Now, if things had taken place as they should have taken place according to the LP 40 policy in Luton's plan, we would have had midway last year lots of new policy guidance from Luton about all of their new airport development. And I have a spreadsheet detailing every single planning application for the airport, and it's a huge spreadsheet. I mean, it's long. There's been all these different things going on, and for them not to have updated their local plan to reflect all of this, so we can then use it to feed into this that we've had to undertake with you here, and we're now being told not the same thing might happen here as well. It's just a horrendous double-layered nightmare as far as I'm concerned. It couldn't.
Forgive me. Yeah, I have the point. I mean, I have the point about the early review proposed by the council here. I have the point about, well, in effect, look what's happened in Luton, so I don't believe it's going to happen here. But look, that's not my agenda for today.
No, but we're talking about a strategic master plan here, and strategic doesn't end at the border. Strategic is supposed to take into account other cross-boundary, by definition to the statutory definitions, cross-border issues. So we can't not consider it. I was considering what happens in the case where they don't do what they've been told by the inspector to do. Do we follow it up with Stephen Ewell? He was the planning inspector for Luton. I felt like maybe I need to write to him and tell him, you gave a condition, it's totally been ignored. We're now trying to make sense of that in regards to this current thing. What happens? What gives? Why nothing, apparently. They're just doing it anyway. And at the moment, the justification for this is on very, very shaky ground. Illegal, possibly, not necessarily, but possibly because there is a live investigation now currently underway into Luton Borough Council. So if this is happening now, it becomes a safeguarding issue. And I mentioned safeguarding yesterday, and I realised safeguarding in planning terms doesn't have the same definition as it does in social care. So, the NPPF has social, economic, sustainable as those three pillars. And so when we talk about safeguarding in planning, in sustainability, we're talking about land that will be put to one side and it will be, earmarked for something and not used. Safeguarding in social childcare has a entirely different meaning. It's about protecting the safety of an area, maintaining transparency and making sure the law is being followed. So, and that nobody comes to any harm. So it's an entirely different meaning. So I didn't choose my words particularly well yesterday when I just called it safeguarding, but that's what I meant by safeguarding in regards to the land sites that Luton is not revealing. And I don't think, I've consulted someone who's an expert in this matter, and how land parcels are the process. There's a step-by-step process how they are used to clean money. So the fact that there are these land parcels that would otherwise be alternatives, but yet have not been declared as being even existing, but yet they do, and they can be visibly seen, and large amounts of money are passing through them, and it's only a row of terrace houses in a back street in Luton. There's no way you can justify £122 million coming through in 6 separate sales through that property without having to maybe put a safeguard around it and pass that information on, because there's something unusual there. Maybe
I noted that point yesterday.
I feel that I've risked a lot by coming out and saying this. I think that if what's going on there needs to be passed on to the same people that are currently investigating the missing 1.1 million for the Mark Rutherford School. It's a serious fraud office, I believe, that's doing it, or some other unit. They need to be in receipt of this information. And I'm reluctant to do it myself because, you know, my house might get burnt down or something might happen to me, and I don't want that to happen. However, I don't recommend this. This thing is very, this whole thing could end in tears. I mean, or someone getting killed or something. So I don't really want to come out in great detail with all that I've found out. But I don't want to sit on it either. So what do I do with that information? Yes, it might be inconvenient and it might be a bit embarrassing, but, you know, it's Luton Borough Council that we're dealing with here, and it does involve them, and they are a local authority, and they're supposed to work hand in hand with the police. So I think that it needs rating.
For we're just straying too far now, so I need to reel you back in a little bit to my agenda for today.
Yeah, well, I hope that this information doesn't get swept under the carpet, because I hope that, because I think I've done very well to uncover it, and I think it does feed directly into land supply and justification for taking away our green belt, because I bring this to your attention now so that you can keep your pristine reputation separate from what calamity could befall those in connection with that, because I am shocked at how much money is passing through in connection with this land. It may be legitimate, it may not be legitimate, I don't know, but it doesn't matter whether the land is registered offshore. Factually speaking, the land hasn't gone offshore. The land is still here and it's still available, and they do have compulsory purchase powers. And in the PPG, they are supposed to utilise them to try and meet their housing needs. So I don't see any reason why that I should be talking about a retail centre just over there on the Greenbelt when we've got a perfectly good retail centre in town. And if we're really talking strategic master plan, all of these issues would be looked at thoroughly, and Luton would have participated in it. And the fact that there's nobody here today doing that is a warning bell in and of itself, because it makes me wonder, why haven't they come here today to address these matters? And I could have asked them directly. It's almost like they didn't come because they knew they might be asked. But I'm going to write and ask anyway. But I don't think it's a particularly safe thing that I should have to be the one to put my neck on the line and do it. but it has to be done, because if I don't do it, no one will. But I don't want to be the one to do it. So I'd rather somebody who's has a safeguard around them and are in a position of authority to do it, such as the councillors, or maybe yourself, because you are from the Secretary of State and you will have the right channels through which you can go. So I'm asking it to be looked at, because there is an open investigation at the moment into that, and this relates directly to it. So I hope that you'll do the right thing with that information I've given you.
Okay, thank you. Just before you go, Ms. Cotier, I'm going to take very final comments now. So if there's anything else that you wanted to say on FM 009, now's the chance.
No, I feel absolutely exhausted by this whole ordeal, frankly. And I'm on the one hand, I'm really glad that it's been so thorough, and I'm grateful for that. I really am, and I think it's important. And I think generally overall, everybody that has participated in this has spoken favourably of the fact that they have been so fairly listened to. And regardless if we don't know the outcome, we might not be pleased at that, but nonetheless, the process that's been undertaken to get there, we feel has been very fair, and we're grateful that we felt we have been listened to.
Good. Thank you. Ms. Hamilton.
I'm guessing this is the. Can you hear me, sir? I'm guessing this is the last thing I'm ever going to say to you. Right. This is the last. This links up with the strategic master planning and the master plans of all the sites, which is it's the last word I've said. While everyone's been talking, I've gone through the plan, and what concerns me, sir, and I want to address this to the council as well, is those modifications that were agreed upon at the start of December. Half of them have been done and half of them haven't. And I'll raise just one quick point. NE6 11.51, they've put in half of the sentence that was supposed to be put back, but they have now put 10-metre buffers instead of 12 metres. That concerns me, that part of the modifications have been changed and part of them haven't. It's also not under NEX anymore. It's under all these different things and all these different sections, which is why it's just taken me so long. So 11.51 in NE6 is supposed to be reading 12 metres, not a minimum of 10 metres. And it also says that you could possibly use the metric calculator if, I think it's which I can give you the definite word in, because this is the last thing I'm going to be saying to you. Which can be used with the metric calculator. Well, it wasn't which, it was a definite. So, you know, I'm raising that with the council. I'm going to have to sit and, when you say we'll have to have another consultation just on those modifications, that's something that 2 of the points that I've just pulled up that haven't been fully, properly executed. And this does affect it, because it all links into obviously the strategic master planning and everything. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time, Inspector, as well. It's been a I won't say a pleasure, but thank you for listening to us. Thank you very much, and to the council, and I hope that can be sorted, because I don't want to have to talk to anyone again for a while. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Ms. Hamilton. Ms. Norgan.
I wanted to put Ms. Sonnendair, Transition Town Letchworth, right, because although I would agree with her on the fact that Letchworth Town Centre has numerous empty shops, because I counted them and dealt with those under matter 29, and suggested the council be much more creative in their town centre and brought in mixed use. Instead of using valuable green belt, but to put Ms. Sonnendair right, there is not an increase in population. I talked about this yesterday, and we've tried to drive this home, but it hasn't got home to certain people. The Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence, talking about a 1.35 million drop in the UK population. And also I talked yesterday about the massive drop in births. So there has not been an increase at all in population.
Okay, thank you for that. Before I go then to the council for its final word on FM 009, is there anything else from anyone else before I shut the gate? Very good, thank you. I'm not sure if that's for you, Ms. Flage, or for you, Mr. Smith.
I'll start perhaps, and then Ms. Flage can pick up. Just to address Ms. Ananda's points really first, I think it's a similar point to the point made earlier about the school. I think overall, the plan is sufficiently flexible to accommodate if the needs of service providers change. There's provisions in the policies on infrastructure, healthy communities around working with service providers, in this instance, the CCG, Clinical Commissioning Group, to secure that infrastructure. Obviously, the requirements in the plan are evidence based on the advice of those providers, but we do recognise that the plan, once it's adopted, is a static document, and life goes on outside the window, doesn't it? And things may change, but as I say, the plan is sufficiently flexible to accommodate those changes. And I guess as a segue to Ms. Flage, the master planning requirements really allow these sorts of things to be picked up in terms of consulting with key stakeholders as sites come forward. It's certainly not our intention that the Heritage Foundation or any other party waste their time or money pursuing elements that aren't necessary. I say that will be picked up going forward through the master planning process.
Yeah, just to continue that, in policy SP9, in the supporting text, it does make reference to large sites that are developed over a long period of time. And master plans may require review and be flexible to adapt to changing circumstances, because obviously life changes, doesn't it, from the time of a plan adoption during the implementation of large sites. So it's important through the strategic master planning exercise that evidence base is refreshed. And part of that evidence base is, as Nigel says, consulting with stakeholders on what their infrastructure requirements are. So hopefully the strategic master plans, will allow appropriate master plans with the right infrastructure and facilities to be built out at that point in time.
And the point about whether or not the master plan for the East of Luton sites should address the issue of road width.
I think it's picked up, and again, Mr. Page may want to chip in here, just in the general requirements there of SP9 that we've been discussing today. Obviously, it talks about effectively looking at transport and transport infrastructure as part of that process.
Yeah, so within the strategic master plan, movement framework needs to be set out, which identifies a variety of things, including strategic highways on and off site. So strategic highways that are sort of fundamental to support that development that need to be understood and fixed. I think that's all the policy can say.
Okay, thank you. Right, so yeah, I'm going to move now then to make just one or two closing remarks. then. So yeah, firstly, if I can extend my thanks to everyone who's attended all of the hearing sessions over the past few years, for all of the contributions that they have made, and that's particularly for local residents who've given up a significant amount of their time to be here. And unlike me and others, I fully appreciate that local residents don't get paid for all the time that they've spent working on this. And I do appreciate, as I say, that a great deal of people's time has been spent on it. So for that, I'm very grateful for all of the input that I've received. As well, even though they have been paid for it, I'd nonetheless like to thank the council's team for all the hard work that they have put in throughout the examination. It has been an exceptionally long and difficult, complicated examination, and I'm grateful as well to the council's team for their stamina and as well for their willingness to discuss issues and changes during the hearings and to be receptive, at least in some cases, to those. As well, I always extend my thanks to my programme officer, but particularly in this case to Mrs. St John Howe, who I think has done a sterling job at helping to make sure that everything has run as smoothly as it possibly can. Although Louise will fully appreciate that her work here is not yet done. But nonetheless, thank you very much, Louise. So I'm about to set out the next steps and then to close the hearing. Are there any questions on procedural points or anything else just before I do that?
Well, no, just to say on behalf of the council, sir, and I'm sure on behalf of all the representatives as well, thank you so much for the very careful and courteous way in which you have listened to what everybody has had to say. I'm sure everybody who's participated in this examination has very much appreciated that. Your unfailing courtesy has been an absolute exemplar, so thank you very much for that, sir. And also again, on behalf of the council and the representatives, just to thank Louise St John Howe for her unfailing efficiency in dealing with everybody and organising everything in such a splendid manner. And I'm sure we all wish you a good trip back to your family. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bartley, could I also reiterate what Mrs. Onsby has said, but she didn't add in the bit about your patience, because I'm sure there have been moments when you felt you could go bald pulling your hair out over this long period of this debate. But I think at the end of the day, of course, the proof will be in the eating. And I wish you most sincere wishes in putting together all your comments on this marathon saga of this local plan. And a lot of people are indeed looking towards you to come up with the right answers. So best of wish. I hope it's not goodbye, but perhaps it nearly will be.
Well, thank you all very much for those kind words. Okay then, unless there are any other questions. Very good. Okay, so yeah, next steps then, as I have indicated already, there will be a consultation on the main modifications that the council has put forward that haven't as yet been consulted upon, and alongside that an opportunity to comment on some homework or other evidence that the council has produced, but where so far there hasn't been the opportunity to comment on it. Following that consultation, then I'll be looking to produce a report to the council, and the likely timescale for the submission of that report, well, I can't commit to a specific date at the moment, not least of all because much depends on the council completing the draft main modifications and getting the consultation underway. That said, I am hopeful at least that the consultation can commence later on this month. At the end of that consultation, then I'll carefully consider all of the points that have been put to me throughout the examination, during all of the hearings, and indeed in response to the various consultations that have been undertaken before coming to my conclusions. But rest assured that although I can't set a specific date or anything like that at present, I will be aiming to get that to the council as soon as I possibly can. Yeah, it's perhaps worth stressing, I think, to the council that the process, as the council will know, is that in the first instance I send a copy of my report solely to the council for the purpose of fact checking. That's not, though, an opportunity to raise any arguments with any points in my report that the council doesn't like. But one area that I suggest to the council that it would be helpful to me to focus on, particularly in this examination, is the accuracy of the main modifications and cross-referencing, because as you know, in this case, we do have main modifications that have then been modified subsequently once, and in some cases more than once. So if the council can keep a meticulous eye on those things, I'd be especially grateful. Yeah, so I should stress that I will not now accept any further evidence or any other documents apart from where I have previously agreed to accept them, or if I should specifically request anything further. I think everyone's had ample opportunity to furnish me with the evidence and comments that they wish to raise. So with that then, I now make it 5:17 and I now formally close the examination hearing sessions. Thank you all very much, and if I can ask everyone to press leave meeting for the last time.
Thank you, Inspector.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheerio.